Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
In the spirit of Quicksilver Highway and many others. What is the deepest, most profane or bizarre thing a homeless, odd or drifting person ever told you? For me, it was a man at a bus station who whispered,
"Has a dead man ever asked you for the time? If one did, would you ever know?"
Here in Reno, Nevada, we have a bunch of homeless lurking around the river. I sat next to this one fellow who was holding a stick into the water. I asked him what he was doing. He said fishing. I told him he didn't have any bait or hooks, it was just a stick. He cleared his throat and said,
"Don't let them know that."
If anyone here lives in the Plantation Hollywood area in South Florida, then maybe you've all seen the Gandolf-like old black man on the corner of the street preaching things. I've passed by him a few times in the car, but never really got a chance to hear what he was saying. He has a long black beard, always wears this long brownish gown down to the floor, and carries around a large walking stick that's about 6 feet tall. The strange thing about the stick though is that it's rounded at the top and it's got these curves and indents all around it. It just creeps me out. He gives off a sort of vibe like he's from a different time period.
I have to take the bus to work. Normally I get there by 5:30 a.m., and I'm usually the only one there waiting for it. However, a couple weeks ago I realized that someone was also there. While I was making my way to the stop, I noticed that this guy was dead focused on me, and it seemed as if he was waiting for me. After about a minute of standing there waiting, he said the following to me.
"Why are you always worried about being late? I thought we already discussed that time didn't exist."
Right after he said that, I turned around to ask him if he was talking to me, but he was gone, completely vanished.
Whoa, creepy. I had a similar experience. For a while I refused to go through the trouble of getting a car and relied on the junction of 2 buses to get me from home to college and to a friend's house in between. One really late night, pushing past midnight, was a similar ratty middle-aged blonde guy yelling and cursing to what appeared to be people I could not see, threatening them and chasing them away. He would return to sit by the bus stop with me, and I just kind of stood there with my hand in my handbag where I carried a pair of throwing knives I practiced with in my friend's backyard. Thankfully, I didn't need to use them, but I was still cautious the whole bus ride home since he was on it.
We picked up a hitchhiker about 10 years ago, but instead of him freaking us out, we freaked him out. Started off just smoking pot with him, going up 95. Then my friend gave him some acid, and about a half hour later we all started to trip. All of a sudden my friend starts going on and on about how everything is now a cartoon, and he starts driving like 100 miles an hour. He did this often, and I was about as used to it as one could get, but the hitchhiker guy was freaking out. He was screaming to pull over and how he didn't want to die. He kept saying, I'm sorry," over and over until we let him out at a rest stop. He was pissed but too scared to screw with us. After that we took off and had a good laugh for the rest of the trip.
Okay, not exactly homeless, but an interesting exchange nonetheless. This happened to a classmate of mine a few years back. He's at a gas station on the corner of the campus. He just left the convenience store portion, was drinking a beer, and waiting for a friend of his who was still paying for stuff inside. All of a sudden this car swerves into one of the pumps, narrowly avoiding him, and grinding up against one of those yellow concrete pylons. Out of it comes some disheveled lady, practically flopping out of her car. She starts mumbling something unintelligible and immediately starts reaching for this guy's beer. Surprised, but quick-witted, he slaps her hand away and says,
"Get your greasy hands off my beer."
At this she gets all harumph-type offended and starts saying, in a drunken cigarette-scarred voice,
"Oh, well, we'll see about that. What's your cell number?"
She starts reaching back into her car. My classmate is all like, what the hell, and is worried she might draw a weapon. Instead she comes out with a paper and pad.
"What's your cell number for when you go to jail?"
In response to this he simply starts listing off random numbers. The lady triumphantly finishes writing down the numbers, hops back in her car, grinds her car free of the concrete pylon, and nearly runs over my classmate's friend just as he was exiting the convenience store.
Well, last month, when I was leaving my dorm, there was this homeless guy across the street, so I went over and gave him a 5 and walked off. Later on, when I was grabbing a bite at Taco Bell, I noticed he was staring at me through the window. This creeped me out, so I took the other door out and booked it home. Next morning, go figure, he was across the street again. Since it was daylight and I was feeling brave, I asked him why the hell he followed me. He said, I was curious, then grabbed his shit and walked off. Haven't seen him since.
My friend and I bought too much food once, so we took what was left. We ordered for a friend who never showed up and gave it to a nearby homeless dude. I delivered it. After I gave him the food, he put it in a bag he had and stared me straight in the eye. I may never forget what he said.
You're a nice kid. You didn't have to bring me this food, so I'll give you a favor. In return, I'll give you some advice.
I was skeptical at first. He obviously had made a wrong choice somewhere along the line.
There will come a time in your life where you will need to make a horrible decision, something you can't take back and will change your life. When the time comes, don't just make the logical choice, and don't follow your heart or whatever shit they tell you in school these days. Step back and look at the problem from all sides. What is the logical thing? What does your gut tell you? Is there a way out? And then make the choice where you can still live with yourself afterwards.
He picked up his bag and walked away, saying one more thing to me.
That's what I did.
Sup/x/ we've had some awesome drifters wisdom threads in the past, and just a week ago, I had my own experience with one of them. I was at university, waiting for a test to begin, standing in front of the room with some other students, as an old guy walked the hallway towards us. He seems totally misplaced in a university, no professor, no student, he doesn't even look like a cleaner or something. Like I said, he was old, had a beard, a hat, a green jacket and a bag in his hand. As he arrives at the room we're standing in front of, he asks, "What are you waiting for here?" We tell him that there's a test about to take place. It was a programming test, so we were waiting in front of the computer room. He looks inside the room and sees the computers. Then he says something along the lines of how we wouldn't need computers and technology and how we should go back to concentrating our minds on ourselves and our abilities again. Someone then jokingly says that we, as IT people, do need computers. The man just smiles and says how it would indeed be possible to be an IT guy without any technology whatsoever. Then he slowly, genuinely walked away, on through the hallway and disappearing down or up. I didn't look back at him, the stairs. Pretty awkward.
They're always very wise. To become a drifter, you've already made a leap out of the norm. That takes real intelligence and courage. I was once really depressed, stupid stuff involving my girlfriend. I don't let things like that get to me anymore, though. Anyway, this guy, fairly scruffy, comes up to me and asks,
"Why so sad, guy? You're still breathing. Smile some more."
And I just said, "I'm not happy. I can't smile." He nods his head, smiling while he does, and then says,
"You misunderstand. You don't smile when you're happy. Smiling makes you happy."
So, I smiled for the rest of the day, and you know what? I was happy.
The Phantom Hitchhiker of Route 44. Many people have encountered the specter of a long-dead hitchhiker along the wooded area of Route 44 while driving from Seekonk to Rehoboth. The man is sometimes well kept, other times he is dirty with his clothes in disarray. A few details that remain constant in every encounter: his hair is always red, and he's always dressed in a plaid shirt. One woman reported running over a man fitting that description late one night. The man seemingly appeared out of nowhere, and the woman, taken by surprise, had no time to prevent a collision. When she jammed on her brakes and leapt out to investigate, she found no evidence of anyone being in the road at all. She did hear, however, a cackling laugh emanating from the woods alongside her. Frightened, the woman returned to her car and continued on. A few minutes later, the same thing happened again. The man appeared, and once more she hit him. Too frightened to leave her car, the woman rolled down her windows to inspect the road. As before, there was nothing or no one to be seen. The disturbing laugh returned, this time much closer, as if a few feet from the car. Sufficiently terrorized, the woman peeled out at full speed.
Vanishing Hitchhiker. At around the same time as the above prophetic hitchhiker, a second itinerant soothsayer was vanishing from cars around Interstate 5, between Tacoma, Washington, and Eugene, Oregon. Described as a 50 to 60-year-old woman, sometimes in a nun's habit, the hitchhiker would discourse on God and salvation before vanishing from the car's cabin. Another witness had been warned to repent his unspecified as sins or die in a road accident. As 1980 progressed, this vanishing hitchhiker began to display a worrying interest in Mount St. Helens. She took to warning motorists that the eruption of that volcano in May 1980 signified God's warning to the northwest, and that those who did not return to the fold could expect to perish volcanically in the very near future, May 18th, to be precise. Tacoma police logged 20 calls from motorists who had met this sinister individual. Latterly, the woman took on a new guise, or perhaps a new vanishing hitchhiker with similar preoccupations assumed her duties, and the roads were again busy with whispered intimations of pending disaster, this time, set for October 12th. The Midnight Globe, August 5, 1980, quotes 2 police officers who had dealt with shocked motorists and 1 motorist who claimed to have met the vanishing woman or women.
Vancouver, University of British Columbia, 16th Avenue West. It is said that a woman was left on the road by her boyfriend because the two had an argument. It was raining and no public transit was present then. The woman was walking and hitchhiking east on 16th Avenue West when she was struck and killed by a motor vehicle. Soon after her funeral, reports of a young woman hitchhiking was reported to the police, and some even tried to pick up and try to help her from getting home and to keep her dry from the Vancouver rain. If a driver is accompanied by a passenger and offered the hitchhiker a lift home, she would just ignore them and continue walking, and if a lone male driver stops and offers the hitchhiker for a ride, she would not hesitate and jumps in the rear seat. The driver would then ask the hitchhiker where home is, and of course there would be no answer, because the woman is not there.
I spent 10 years of my youth, homeless, drifting across Canada, hitchhiking and riding freight trains across every province. I never knew where I wanted to call home, so I just traveled to this beautiful country to see which places I liked best. I have many years of experience with trapping and wilderness survival, so being stranded in places has never been an issue for me. This particular story happened in the summer of 2013. I was hitchhiking out of Williams Lake, British Columbia, but it was getting late and I was having a hard time getting picked up on the small shoulder at the edge of town, until one man pulled over and said, "I can't drive you very far, but there's a roadside rest stop a few kilometers down the highway and I think you might have better luck there." I agreed. The man drove me to the rest stop, and from there, I pulled out my cardboard sign that said "Waste" in bold black Sharpie. I stood there for a couple hours to no avail, until it finally got too dark, and obviously your chances of being picked up at night are very slim. I decided to hike off in the woods to set up my tarp and sleeping bag, and my plan was to sleep through the night and in the morning I would walk back to the highway and try again. So there I go, flashlight in hand, walking into the bush off the highway. I have always had a hard time sleeping with trucks and big rigs, so I hiked about 200 to 250 meters into the bush off the highway so that some of the sound from the traffic wouldn't be so deafening. I set up my tarp, in an A-frame configuration between 2 trees, a tarp draped over a tight line of paracord and pinned down with tent pegs. This has been my go-to shelter for many years. It was around 11 p.m., now pitch black outside. I didn't bother to get a fire going because I was exhausted from walking all day with my 30-pound backpack. I crawled into my sleeping bag, and I was out like a light. In the middle of the night I awoke to tree branches cracking all around me, big branches. Whatever it was big, and I heard heavy panting/breathing, but the scary part is that it sounded like a human breathing, and very close, right outside my tarp. I thought it might have been a bear, but in my mind, there was no way it was a human because I was in a pretty remote area and it was like 3 a.m. Super unlikely it would be anyone deliberately trying to screw with me, and there were no cars parked at the roadside turnout parking lot earlier that night when I retreated into the woods. I am positive nobody saw me walk into the woods. I was paralyzed with fear and laying perfectly still holding my knife and my flashlight, which was turned off. Then, next thing I know, a huge log gets thrown and collapses my entire tarp on top of me. I started screaming as loud as I could and I climbed out with my knife. I lit my flashlight and whatever it was ran off in the bush, and I never got a good view of it, but all I could see were very tall bushes being rattled as it took off into the woods. Then I looked at the log that got thrown at me. I was in awe. It missed my head by mere inches, and pinned my tarp into the dirt below. It was about 8 feet long and maybe 10 feet in diameter. It would have killed me. I built a fire using whatever sticks were laying around the small clearing where I had my camp. I kept looking in all directions with my flashlight and I was terrified. I figured if I had a fire it might ward off whatever it was that I just had a close encounter with. At any rate, I had no intention of staying long. I took apart my shelter/rolled up my tarp and packed everything up, because I was getting the hell out of there. It took some serious muscle to move the log and get my tarp unstuck. Once I was packed up, I then walked back to the highway and waited until dawn before trying to catch a ride. Felt safer there. Whatever threw that log was no bear, and I know it wasn't a human. I initially thought the log might have broken off from a dead tree above, but that was not the case. All the trees in my vicinity were alive and well. It was thrown. Williams Lake, British Columbia has been a known hotspot for Bigfoot sightings, and to this day, I am convinced that what I encountered that night was in fact the legendary Sasquatch. There are stories about a certain kind of hitchhiker. They only ever appear at night on quiet roads, seeming to flicker into existence in the very edge of headlights, never carrying a sign, always with an expression of deep despondency on their faces, swathed in a heavy coat and long pants, usually with gloves. If you stop, they will seem cordial enough, polite, but hardly chatty. They will assure you that the next town or city along your route will be a fine spot to leave them. Normal enough. Unless you try killing them. They die easily enough. But look underneath their clothes, and you will see that their skin is marred with lines of scars, forming repeating patterns that are unsettling to look at, and even more unsettling in the context of their skin. They have no wallets, no identification. If you slice their belly open, however, they're different inside. There's no blood, no muscle, only a hollow cavity containing a single object. The object varies. Examples include a single coin, heavy and golden and engraved with runes nobody could ever decipher. A diamond gem with fractal edges that slice bare flesh to ribbons. A small vase, quite unbreakable, that smells of the ocean and is always damp. Once you possess a hitchhiker's object, you'll find yourself always driving the quiet roads at night. You'll never mean to, but somehow, you just will. The lure of possessing a second one will hum quietly in your head. You'll strain to catch sight of a figure appearing in your headlights, try to resist the impulse to stop, and sometimes you might. But sometimes you won't. You'll try telling yourself that this is just a normal person on an adventure, someone who ran out of petrol. The logical part of your brain will scream at what you're doing. You'll smile and nod and they'll get into the car and you'll slowly, casually, reach under the seat or across to the glove box.
Good morning, X. I've never believed in the paranormal, even in the year or so I've been here. That all changed a few months ago. I think I've been cursed. See, for the longest time, I had defended the ugly, unloved, fat, etc. by any means necessary. I had a much better understanding of the difficulties presented to those who live with those features because my older brother took his own life because of the way he was treated, him being the less fortunate child. I've punched my best friend in the face for making fun of a guy sitting next to us in the donut shop, alone, asking for 3 glazed for his mom because it's Mother's Day and he said he loved her. The guy was middle-aged and rode a bike there and was not in the cleanest or most attractive state. My best friend bursts out laughing. I then punched him in the face. Since I was pretty much the leader of my clique, my friends followed my moral guidance. So he stopped laughing. That guy looked at my friend, got his donuts, and left. Within the next month, several events happened and my then best friend lost all of his friends, earned the scorn of his family, and became a drifter.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.